Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's 7th Brigade Professional Military Education session. Today we'll be discussing a wet gap crossing. We look at our region, nearly every MSR along a coastal plain crosses waterway after waterway after waterway. So we're probably not going to do this once, we're probably going to do this again and again and again. Commander, sir.
It's fantastic to see a number of external people from the brigade coming here. I think it is a clear demonstration of, our willingness as an army to ensure that our understanding of the profession of arms and what we actually are required to undertake as a military organisation, as an army, noting over the last few years a number of these skill sets and our opportunities to undertake these types of actions have not been as frequent as we would have liked. It very much reinforces the point that was highlighted by Craig Malcolm in regards to this is a journey, and this is the first point. Understanding the fundamentals, the principles, the tenets, etc. is all important as you then start to put it into practice. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of aspects. Firstly, for those that did have an opportunity to participate in Posier's walk from the Div perspective, obviously that focused very much on the division. It spoke about some of those, responsibilities when you start to look at it from an echelon perspective, and it also focused, heavily on fires, sustainment, ISR. It didn't really on that day touch much on engineering. Obviously there's a fair bit of engineering in what we're going to talk here from a perspective, but it really focused on what division provides. This will obviously start to get into a bit more detail into that tactical action. And for the 7 Brigade folk, obviously we have focused throughout the year on increasing, in particular at the headquarters, increasing that understanding of the principles, tenets, fundamentals for certain tactical actions, so you have a start point when you go into undertaking these on exercise and then subsequently on operations. So this is all part of that crawl, walk, run methodology of first steps and understanding. There'll be more questions that are raised or should be brought into your minds as a result of today than we will answer today. That is on purpose. The last point I want to reinforce is the importance of the mess. We are often, at risk in our messes, and maintaining the mess as a centrepiece of our organisation is critical, and it's where fantastic conversations are actually undertaken, it's where relationships are built, and it's where combined arms teams come together to talk and discuss about problems. This is a problem that is significant and not simple. It is the most complex undertaking that a formation, a division will actually do to synchronise, to plan, to conduct, to rehearse, and do all those factors for those that have ever been involved. I've been involved in putting a brigade across shoalwater, and for all those reasons, it is that. We are going to come together in certain organisations and with certain force elements from other countries into a staging area about 72 hours before we do some of these actions. So for us to understand it and know it and the principles, and I'll talk right at the end about some of the considerations. I spoke to the Div Commander last night, and I'll provide some commentary about what he sees are some of the considerations as we go through this. But from my perspective, fantastic learning opportunity. It is about our profession, and these are the sorts of things we need to be doing more of in regards to understanding the complexity. And everyone's very quick to be critical of the Russians as they undertook a number of these. I would offer, if the Australian Army launched on one of these right now, I'm not sure there will be significant differences in the outcomes. We need to go and practice this and do it and rehearse it, and this is a fantastic opportunity to do it. So I look forward to the rest of the afternoon and then an opportunity to further have some discussions in the mess. Thank you.
We're going to play a short video now. Yes, it's the Suez Canal, so it's not our near region. But what it's going to highlight is, rightly or wrongly, what people could have perceptions of as a second-rate army conducting this operation at scale across an opposed crossing, highlighting the level of rehearsal, resourcing and synchronisation and ingenuity and innovation that is required to be able to undertake a crossing. Play, please.
The Egyptians were unleashing their barrage of fire at a rate of 175 shells per second on the Israeli units. After this heavy barrage of fire, the Egyptians, under the command of the Chief of Staff Saad al-Shazli, unleashed its assault across the canal at approximately 1420 hours. Supporting was a fleet of about 1,000 rubber boats that carried thousands of commando, anti-tank and infantry units across the canal. All of them were crossing at a 15-minute interval. But now the plan proposed by Baki Zaki Youssef was immediately put into action. Egyptian engineers immediately executed the plan. 15,000 men strong, organized into 35 battalions, these men went with their water cannon to get the job done. The cannons got its water from the Suez Canal behind them and blasted them off powerfully through the sand, which made them come back pouring down into the water in the form of mud. Each lane had to be cleared of approximately 2,000 cubic yards of sand. However, it was not all sunshine and rainbow for the engineering corps. That area became a sea of mud, which can reach depth that even infantrymen find it hard to pass by. Nonetheless, all operations were completed within the first 16 hours of the war. By 0800 hours of the next day, October 7, 1973, those Egyptian engineers had managed to breach nearly 80 lanes in the sandbanks along the entire length of the canal and built more than 10 pontoon bridges across the canal. They removed 3 million cubic meters of sand during the first day of the war using only water pump. Thanks to their effort, a total of about 80,000 men, of which 32,000 poured in within the first 3 hours of the war, 500 tanks and about 11,000 vehicles of the Egyptian military poured into the bridgehead established by the initial landing force to the east of the Suez Canal. Shortly after establishing the bridgehead, the priority was put high into transferring the anti-tank units across the canal, which means B-10 and B-11 recoilless anti-tank guns from the Soviet Union were already arriving at the front line at the time of the Israeli armored counterattack, which means those tanks come straight into a jaw of death. The Egyptian anti-tank units literally used their new technology to destroy those tanks, a lot of them.
Good morning, sir, ladies and gentlemen. Craig Berry, I'm the CEO of the 2nd Combat Engineer Regiment. Welcome to this afternoon's presentation. It's about 50 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes what we're about to go through. Please try and clear your heads. It's going to be a lot of information. I'm not here to teach you how to be a combat engineer. We're just trying to hit, I say wave tops, but also there's a heap of detail. So try your best to sort of take it all in. As Colonel Malcolm said, there's plenty of time post this to have more discussions, do some more learning about it, and understand your role in it, certainly those from 7 Brigade as we move forward in the Warfighter and then Talisman Sabre. So, flicking through the Art of War, there was some stuff in there from Sun Tzu, and I think I put it there. Obviously, everyone's probably seen that photo of the Russian, one of their failed river crossings. It's a fairly poignant quote even today. Slide, please. So these are the references for today's brief, primarily the river crossing publication. I just got a couple of points for that, for those that actually get it out and have a look at it. You'll note that it was written last published or released 12 years ago. There's some comments in there that need to be updated. It primarily focuses on division level, brigade level and below. Some of the things can be elevated to division, and I'll provide some examples of that today. We don't currently have a publication that has sort of division river crossing as the heading, but we can use the lessons from that publication and elevate them. Another point that you may read in there is the preface states that it is recognised that deliver river crossings at brigade level is currently not possible due to limitations in organisation, staffing and equipment. That is incorrect. The equipment side of it was primarily when our floating support bridge at the time had a military load classification recategorisation, which meant they could carry less, hence the caveat that was put into the PAM. So if you do get in there for whatever reason and have a look, and you've got any questions about it, please come and talk to 2CR. We can provide clarification on what we can actually do today, knowing that was published 12 years ago. And with the primers, we'll push them out after. We've developed primers not just for what you're going to see today, also the breach and some other mobility type activities that we're hoping that can go into your CP trunks or into your electronic CP trunks for you to get out and reference when you need to in whatever role you're working in. So we're going to cover some theory today on gap crossing or river crossing. I'll use that terminology interchangeably. To me, it's the same thing. I think the American doctrine talks more about the gap crossing bit. Ours sort of says river crossing, it's the same thing. Gap could have no water in it, river obviously could have water in it. Planning and then some C2 and then some higher headquarters and other BOS considerations at the end. So river crossing, it's a combined arms activity. Actually, before I do that, I'll take you through the mud model. All right, so in front of you is a mud model. It's based on a brigade. Division, for example, has cut the brigade in AO, and it's provided its boundaries for this task today. So we'll go from, as you see it, north, south, east and west on the mud model. We'll go from assembly area where the brigade is currently situated. This is a holding area. This is basically holding areas are used for if there's any interruptions to traffic flow. So if people are called out of the assembly area and there's an issue getting into the staging area, which is here, this is like a holding point, temporary holding point that they can get called for from later. Today you'll notice we've got 3 routes going into the crossing sites: route gold, route silver and route bronze. We can do it with 2 routes, but we just set it up for 3 routes for today for today's purposes. Therefore, we've got 3 staging areas. These are battle group size staging areas when they're outside the crossing area. I'll talk about more, but the crossing area starts here. Right? So 3 battle group size staging areas. And then we move forward into another holding area. Again, if there's movement forward, the battle group's called forward, and it's for some reason it's held up, it can go into there. Moving forward, and you'll notice a number of TCPs along the route traffic control points. And as I said before, this is the entrance to the crossing area. Okay, so this holding area here is now a combat team size holding area. So that we're not massing forces too close to the river. This blue circle that you see here is a near side objective, which is identified by this. The support force secures this before the crossing force commences putting in the crossing sites. These are for later on for the support force. They are SBF locations. The CFA is a call forward area. These are controlled by engineers. And the vehicles and people go through there before they're called down to the crossing sites. So today we've set up 4 crossing sites, 1, 2, 3 and 4 north to south along a river, which is denoted by, again, the blue line, but also the blue rope. On the far bank, these 2 circles, objectives here are the far side objectives. When we secure those, we eliminate direct fire on the crossing sites themselves, okay? The distance between phase line red and phase line yellow is the crossing area. And that could be, in a brigade context, that could be specified to us by division. So within a 20 kilometre length of river, that's the crossing area. You know, brigade, you find the appropriate crossing sites to get across it. Moving further to the east, we've got 2 more objectives identified in by blue, and they're the exit bank objectives, and they eliminate direct fire onto the crossing area, which is between phase line red and yellow. Further to the east, intermediate objective, once we secure this, we deny observed indirect fire into our crossing area. Further to the east again is our bridgehead objective, and when we've secured this and built up forces, we have the ability to deny any enemy counterattack coming into our crossing and interdicting our crossing. A couple other things of note. It's a control measure and intermediate bridgehead line. The bridgehead line itself, which is basically the limit of exploitation for the bridgehead force. And anything, you'll hear the terminology bridgehead, so anything from the river to the bridgehead line is the bridgehead. The bridgehead line encompasses any objectives that are within that bridgehead itself. So it could be a little bit bigger, but there's no more objectives to the east of this bridgehead line. Just some indicative C2 laydowns. Brigade main, near the assembly area, brigade forward. Commander's tack, forward with the crossing area engineer, which is the C Combat Engineer Regiment headquarters. The CFC is a crossing force commander. They're the subunit commanders of the engineer regiment. That C2, the crossing site commanders, who are lieutenants. So each major has 2 lieutenants in the current engineer squadron construct, 1 troop per site, hence 2 squadrons can do up to 4 sites. The final one, the ERP is an engineer regulatory point. It primarily sits within the CFA if something unexpected turns up and we need to do an assessment on the military load class of what's turned up to make sure that it's suitable to go over what that CFA service at the crossing site that call forward area is servicing. Are there any questions on the MUD model? So it's a combined arms activity designed to project our combat power to the other side of the obstacle, and it can be done opposed or unopposed, ideally unopposed, and the panacea is doing this without being detected at all. I just want to highlight 2 things. We talk about forward passage of lines in the brigade setting, and we'll go through the force structures in a second. Once the support force secures the near side of the river, they basically remain firm. The first passage of lines is when the sights are open. The bridgehead force will move through, and which could be another battle group, to secure the bridgehead objectives. That's the first passage of lines. The second passage of lines in a divisional construct, this is a brigade task that's set the bridgehead secure, and then the breakout force, could be another brigade, moves through this and then breaks out the other side of the bridgehead. So there's a couple of, all you need to remember is that there's, for command and control, there are forward passage of lines that are built into this or can be built into it. By design or just by how it's doctrinally done. Okay, it goes without saying we need a comprehensive and early understanding of the terrain. We need to try and implement some sort of deception. If this is a brigade going west to east, can we feint something to the north to try and distract from what we're about to do here? And we've covered control measures already. Slide, please. So the challenge, basically, it's a contest between our ability to mass and quickly get over the obstacle versus the enemy's ability to detect us and then try and influence our manoeuvre. What's critical about this is that as we're advancing, we have to break formations not only to sort of track along these routes, but also to concentrate, in this case, on 4 crossing sites. We then, during the crossing, split our forces on each side of the river, hence the vulnerabilities that it's pretty obvious what the vulnerabilities are, okay? So the idea is to get it done as soon as possible and not detect it, otherwise we risk getting destroyed in place, which you saw happen to the Russians, and there's a couple of photos in the next few slides. Slide. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. There's 6 types of bridging operations. Seas River Bridge, which goes without saying, if we can get to it first, we secure the bridge, they don't blow it up and we can use it. We're not really going to talk about that today. Hasty and inside breaching, I'm going to touch on that, but then we won't cover it anymore. Deliberate breaching, retrograde, which is obviously if we're conducting a retrograde activity, there still might be a need to cross a river, so we need to think about that as part of any retrograde plan. And then we've got the covert. Covert is really dismounted, light capabilities, get across the river and go and do a specific task. Okay. Sorry, go back one. So I'm just going to cover some doctrinal stuff right now. So hasty, there's a difference between hasty and in stride, and I think sometimes, well, it is conflated. So just so we're on track for terminology. In a bridging operation, the difference between them is all about the use of tactical bridging, which I'll describe that to you next, and support bridging. Okay, so think a tank with a bridge on it that they can expediently put down on the ground. That's a tactical bridge. Okay, so in doctrine, and by the way, the ADF doesn't have any of those. So by the book, we can't do hasty or in-stride bridging because for that reason. But you know, you can call it whatever you want. But that's by the letter of the definitions. The other thing is in the book, hasty is sort of they align that to a battle group, and then in-stride they align it to a combat team. So both of those groups need to have tactical bridging assets. So that's where we're at with the PM. All right, I know you could say, well, why can't you just elevate that, which you could, and say a brigade can do a hasty? They could, but we still don't have the assets. All right, so you can use support bridging for hasty and in-stride, but what that means is that well before you start going, you need to assign the asset, the bridging asset, to it. So as a battle group, you give it to it here, and then it can move forward. So it's still sort of a deliberate iteration. You've just done it all the way, even further back rather than this type of deliberate one. So we'll focus on deliberate crossing today, but that's some terminology and some nuance with the bridging aspects of in-stride and hasty. Slide, please. So this is fight tonight now. So this is what we have in the ADF. I'll draw your attention to the red box: tactical bridging, support bridging, and line of communication bridging, LOC. So I'll move from the left to the right. The JAB, Land 8160 is delivering that from 2025, as far as I'm still tracking. And we'll have those, which will give us a tactical bridging capability, okay? Tick, we can then talk probably in stride and hasty in a bit more detail. So we've got a lot of support bridging. So the medium girder bridge is the one on the top left. The DSB, dry support bridge, is the one on the top right. You can see it needs a fair bit of stuff to actually construct it, but you can construct that quicker than the medium girder bridge up on the top left. Planning time for the bottom right, DSB, about 6 hours once everything's on site. Planning time for the top left, medium girder bridge, around about 12 hours once everything's on site. But note, even in those two examples, you've got one bridge with pier legs on it, which is going to take longer to build, and the other one is an example of a shorter bridge, no pier legs, pretty straightforward. So there's some indicative planning times there. The IRB, improved ribbon bridge, is the one on your top right. The photo in the furthest top corner is its raft configuration. So, like you get a ferry to an island, that type of stuff. And then just underneath that there is the IRB in its bridge configuration. All right, so there's pros and cons to all of them, especially if you're in a tidal river. The bridge configuration, as the tide drops, depending on how deep the tides are, you have to stop bridging, turn the bridge, wait for the tidal window to go through and come back up again, and then turn the bridge back in. So if you're using that, but the payoff on that is once the bridge is set, you got vehicles going over pretty quick. So and all that, the pros and cons all get worked through in how much stuff you got across, what are your other redundant sites and things like that. So we've got a few options. It's just pros and cons to each. And then so all of those support bridging assets are held in a CER. Okay, certainly 2 CR. We've got one set of each of those sitting here on the barracks right now. The line of communication bridging, the fixed modular bridge as it's called, and the photo's just to the right of that. That's a bridge that's held at 6 engineer support regiments, so that's when you start talking in the Div engineers type realm, they'll hold that. And the idea behind that is the support bridging goes in this example we put support bridging in for deliberate crossing. We advance X distance from that. And if we're going to continue to use this for logistics, the Div engineers would come in and put the FMBs in, the fixed modular bridges, and then we'd recover the support bridging and then move it forward again. That's the concept of employment for the bridging. What the conditions are and you know what the triggers are to do that is not something we'll go into today, but that's another part of the planning, because you can lay down all these bridges, you'll soon run out if you river after river after river. So you got to plan that. Slide, please. Okay, so just to, again, part of this is to bring everyone on net with terminology and definitions. So everyone probably knows what wading or fording is. Basically, you're able to drive through it, okay? You don't need any rafts or bridges or anything like that. The vehicle's capable of driving through it. You know, if it's got, not necessarily, that's not talking about deep fording with snorkels and driving under completely submerged or anything. I'm not too sure how many vehicles in the ADF can still do that, nor swim for that matter, but that's where we're at. As I just said, swimming is a vehicle floats on top of the water and moves, okay? And they're important capabilities when you're looking about getting vehicles and combat power on the other side to secure these exit bank objectives and stuff like that. If you don't have the ability to swim a vehicle, you dismounted. So it's going to slow your time to secure these objectives and all that sort of stuff, right? Assault river crossing, this is another one that's probably conflated a lot. Assault river crossing is if this river is part of a bigger obstacle. So if there's the river, minefield panels, anti-tank ditching, whatever, if the enemies use this river as part of a complex obstacle, then we're conducting an assault river crossing, okay? Not to be conflated with one of the phases which we'll talk about later, which is assault across the river, which is to initially get across it once the home bank's secure, okay? So just some nuance in terminology. And then that's the book definition of deliberate crossing. So inland water obstacle requires extensive planning and detailed preparation, and that's what we're going to be doing. Slide, please. Okay, I just want to, I'll just go through a couple more things to set some definition-wise to set the scene, and we'll go from left to right. What you've got there is lay down what you see on there with the objectives, as well as the phases of a deliberate crossing operation overlaid. So a near side objective is terrain on the near side of an obstacle that must be secured to allow the establishment of the crossing. I've already described the crossing area and crossing sites. Crossing sites can also be known as crossing points, so it doesn't matter which terminology you use. Far side objective, terrain on the far side of the river that once secured eliminates direct fire onto the crossing sites. And I've covered the exit bank objectives. Terrain on the far side of the river that once it's secured eliminates direct fire into the entire crossing area. The intermediate bridgehead line, which is further to the right and also on the mud model, is a control measure that defines a temporary limit of an objective area during the development of our bridgehead. And I've covered off on the other ones. All right, so and then we'll go through these phases one by one so we can have a talk about what happens in each phase, all right? Yep. So before we do that though, we'll talk about some of the tenets, and these are the key planning. So if you take anything away from it, if you note these down, then you'll be in a good position to contribute to staff planning. And understand your role in it, because you might not be the ones planning it, but you'll have a good understanding of where you're at as you flow through this with your call signs. So they're the 5 tenets: intelligence, crossing fundamentals, which can be broken down into, you could probably say, yeah, they're probably straightforward, and you'd guess some of them anyway, which is good. Crossing organisation, that's where we'll speak about how this is actually, how we break our forces up to execute this, so we'll spend a bit of time on that. And mass and synchronisation, we'll quickly cover that at the end. Okay, so some key things we need to know of this from a broader intelligence thing is, information about the enemy weapon systems. When we're talking about denying direct fire, denying indirect fire onto the crossing areas and sites, we need to know what those ranges are, right? And that's one of the things the book will say this, and as you can see on there, it's 4 to 6 Ks is about the crossing area. But as technology advances, that challenges some of these, previous assertions about how our crossing sites are laid out and how far the crossing area needs to be and stuff like that. All right, so this is ever evolving, even though it's 12 years since the last one. You get the point though. So other than, I'm not going to dig into the traditional intelligence requirements. From an engineer perspective, we need to know the characteristics of the terrain. I've already said that. We need to know the characteristics of the river in this case. We need to know if there's any obstacles in the river. Because if I was an enemy engineer, I'd be trying to identify likely crossing points and put something in there to mess with you, right? So that you got to play that. You're battling the. So my job as a CO to the brigade commander is to try and fight the enemy engineer. That's part of my job, and to think like what they might want to do, and then provide that into the staff to plan with. I don't know if OBS int is a legitimate intelligence term, but I'm going to run with it. So we're going to, obviously any intelligence on the obstacle laydowns or structures. So it's not just about the river that we're crossing, it's everything else like we normally do. Okay, slide please. I'm not going to spend much time on these. Surprise talks about either the tempo that we generate to get across or how efficient our crossing is. I said it before about the bridge. If we put bridges in, we can flow across a lot quicker. For some reason we can't put the bridges in, it's going to be a bit slower. All right, so anything through deception or tempo to generate surprise for the enemy, that's what we're sort of talking about there. Extensive preparation, not only planning on the logistics side, it's cutting in routes. That's one of the fundamental challenges. If we find a really good site that we don't think the enemy knows about, how are we going to cut the track to it? We're going to use an armoured vehicle, or what are we going to do? How are we going to get access to that site? And you see the amount of call forward areas, and the vehicles will naturally do that, but armoured vehicles are one thing, or track. What about all the logistic vehicles that are going to come along after it? How are we going to do all that? So, and can we get close enough to the river to cut these tracks without giving the game away? Right, so all these things need to be considered. Flexible planning. So the engineer recon thing, which I'll talk about in the very near future, they're going to be, if we're going to attach them to Div or Brigade recon from the engineer regiment, they're going to be feeding us information about, is this axis any good? Is that axis any good? Because it's one thing about the manoeuvre bit, the other thing is if we get an obstacle we can't get across. So you don't want to commit the brigade or the division to something you're not going to be able to get through. So that's the important part of that. But as you can see, if we're tasked to cross this river and Div recon's all the way out there, they're going to need some time to find the viability and potential crossing sites on that river. So we're doing our mission analysis co-dev as we're sort of moving through. This information is going to come back, which is going to impact the plan, mission analysis maybe, co-dev. We need to be prepared to pause, reorientate, and start again with the new information that we've got. Traffic control, you can see it's a traffic control nightmare and a comms nightmare, but the military police will talk about traffic control in more detail, but obviously it's a key consideration in how everything flows through this once it's set. All right, next slide. SOSRA. I hear a lot of people say the word but don't know what the 5 words are, so that's what it is up there. So, when we say, engineers can just go and do a SOSRA, it's not really how it works. So it's suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, assault. That can be applied to breaching operations, it can be applied to this, but there's nuances in it. And there's nuances in the divisional headquarters, in the brigade headquarters. For example, for suppression, divs might have assets that can achieve suppression to things that the brigade won't have. And then when the brigade's looking at SOSRA and suppression, you're probably looking at a bit more about direct fire across the river, obscuration if you need smoke, whereas, you level it up and div can be doing a heap of stuff in the deep. It's still SOSRA. It's just not how we think of it. It's not direct fire over the river, smoke and bombs going in to provide obscuration as well, because of all the stuff it kicks up. And then, the reducing the obstacle. In this case, reducing the obstacle is putting the bridges in. If you're not opposed, you're not really assaulting, you're just moving through, right? So it's nuanced. Next slide. Okay, so we'll move on to the structures of the forces. So you've got 4 forces that we need to sort of constitute to affect this, and again, I'm going to do this in a brigade setting. You've got the support force, so let's just say one battle group. That support force's job is to move through and secure the near bank, the home bank. You'll see there the SBFs. That's their job, to secure these 4 SBFs that are on the map. and set the conditions for the crossing force to move forward and commence establishing the crossing sites. Right, so that's sort of condition one. The crossing force is basically the combat engineer regiment. In the assembly area here, as we approach to here, we might have had a troop, whatever it is, attached to one or more battle groups. This might be the reorg point to remove those engineer assets from the battle groups and concentrate the engineer regiment as a whole, okay, for the purposes of conducting this task. For a planner's perspective, we can do that, and you'll see that the engineer regiment's been formed through the headquarters there, or reformed. One of the challenges for you get across here, you're in the bridgehead. How are we going to reorg? Do we need to? Do we need to get that engineer troop back to the battle group? Does it need a squadron, engineer squadron, to then move to the next task? And then the question is, these need to be maintained, these crossing sites. Okay, so how are you going to do that? Do you need to do it? Can it be done later? These are all some of the questions that we need to think about when we're planning the engineer aspect and when they're going to be centralised and then cut back again. The bridgehead force, so for the purposes of this, we've put it as battle group 1 could do this as well, perhaps, because you're not going to have a whole battle group sitting on the home bank here. We saw what happens to the Russians when you do that. So you could say, oh no, well a whole battle group could do this and then another one could do that, but for the purposes of today, so part of battle group could do this, part of the battle group, and then the battle group can then move forward, battle group minus maybe, and secure the bridgehead objective. I know there's how much enemies there and all that stuff on these objectives. Let's just park that for a little bit, and let's say it's light enemy presence and it pushed it off, right? So you've effectively got a battle group split across, in this scenario, split across the river at the moment. But your bridgehead's secure, that's their job, the bridgehead's force to secure it. Alternatively, you could have a completely separate battle group do that, right? Which means that one battle group would be, or some of it would be near the water. The second one to go through is hence your first passage of lines, and then get ready for the breakout force to come through. So the breakout force, you could call it a battle group in a brigade setting. This could be a brigade task to secure the bridgehead, and then the next brigade comes through in a forward passage of lines through the crossing. Okay, so all that does is everything up to the bridgehead line on the east is secure, and then the next force, we're not going to get into whether this has culminated, in this case the brigade or not, probably wouldn't have, but then you go, this force is going to come through and then continue the advance east, hence the breakout force. It's indicative things, but I'm not going to get too much into the task organisation of it. Next slide. Some other considerations. The size of the force you're putting across will determine how big the crossing area needs to be and how many crossing sites you need. Doctrinally, the brigade is 2, but as I said here, the combat engineers in a brigade can do 4 pretty comfortably. So again, it's all planning information. Time to set the crossing sites up is obviously a factor. And then logistics. It doesn't just happen, certainly in this. It's a one-way street a lot of the time, it's because everything's going towards it. So we need to synchronise certainly the bridging getting into the engineer equipment park there, which is about a k and a half or so from the river, early. I said before, it's a C2 bit of a challenge. You need good networks and you need priorities of net, right? So that's all part of the control plan. Once you enter the crossing area, or once you leave the assembly area, that's got to be who's got priority of net, when, where and how. And then, like we would target enemy bridging, they will target our bridging, so we need to mask it for as long as possible, including when it's moving forward. Or if we find that, way back here at the Div Engineer Park, bridging's moving forward if we need it. All this slide is designed to show you is that when engineer planning is important, right? And it happens concurrent to the staff map. There's probably a no, statement, but there is a whole engineer process that's going aligned to the normal staff map process to feed in at the right points and give the information. Hence, my comment before about the intelligence preparation and understanding the crossing sites and the terrain. If we're not quite there, it's going to impact the plan potentially if we forge too far ahead with the normal staff map process. Slide. I've made a couple of comments about Div and Brigade recon. If we don't know the terrain and don't know the obstacles, we're going to be in trouble when we get down there. And all the engineers in Div recon would tell us is this site is potentially viable. That's it. That's all I really need to know. And then as we advance, I will send confirmatory recons to go and check them out, and then I'll show you a gap crossing thing in a second, and then we'll work the plan up from there. It's just like, yep, this is a viable avenue of approach or axis of advance. Let's go. Next one. Yep. All right, so for your planners out there, when you're looking at maps next time, ideally this is what we want as a sort of an engineer. So for one crossing site, rivers have salients and re-entrants. So in this case, the salient comes in as the river there. Our support force, if we can get them up here, right, which we can cover into here, reduces the area the enemy can be in, and then we'd put a crossing across here, right, as opposed to the other way around where we're more exposed on the far bank. All right, doesn't have to be, but it's something that we can look at. And I mentioned the gap crossing stuff, so the engineer recon will do stuff like this. So that's you can see there's water in it. We can then take that and work out what type of bridging you want to use, all that sort of good stuff. So you might, coming up to this river for the 4 sites, you need at least 4 of those. And then you probably looked at other crossing sites as well to see if their viability. And they might be viable, we just choose not to use them. Okay, next one. So we take, say I get 7 of those back, or 8, whatever. There's 8 in here. So now what the engineers do, we've identified crossing sites and we basically summarise their characteristics. The main brigade staff, and they don't have to do that. This is an engineer function in the regimental headquarters. So these are the characteristics of the potential crossing sites, and then from there we decide which ones we want to select, which is the next slide. We've selected site 3, 5 and 7. We've worked out that the best crossing means to achieve the intent, in this case, is 2 raft sites and a bridge. Some indicative trips per hour or how much we can get across it. And then just a macro level, okay, by time and space, how much we'd need to get combat teams and battle groups, etc. across. Right, so that macro level. Next one. We take, apologies for this is out of the doctrine. I know we're not battle group lion, tiger and bull. So from there we take this and then lay it out in a bit more detail, a bit more for all of the battle groups that we need to cross, and if there's others that are attached to us who are going to come through, we do that too. And then which crossing sites they're going to go to. So that tells us when we can open crossing sites, close them. If it's tidal rivers and we need to swing the bridge, that's going to be closed. Where do we redirect the next priority packet to? So it helps us start to think about the problem in a bit more detail. And then the next one, this is where the rubber really meets the road, and this is your checklist sort of thing to run the battle. You come up with a plan, you go, have we done that, have we done that? This is the engineer version of that for the crossing. This is for rafting, so you've got 2 raft sites. And this is where the information from across the brigade, whatever your crossing is important, we need to know the packets, what they consist of, the crossing times, etc., etc. So then we can backload it through here and go, when's that packet going to be at the holding area? Or when's that packet going to be at the call forward area? So it's reverse engineered, or not really reverse engineered, it's planned so that you could say at 0030, packet X is leaving the assembly area because we've timed all these routes. That's how detailed we try and get it. And then if something happens on this route or the crossing site goes down, it's not really depicted here. You've got laterals, ideally, that connect the different routes so that we can redirect onto another site based on the commander's crossing priorities, which are in the crossing tables. Next slide. Okay. The advance to the gap, assault across the gap, advance to the far side and secure the bridgehead. We're not going to cover the breakout, but that's phase 5. Next slide. All right, so indicatively, we've already sort of touched on it. One of the battle groups comes forward and secures the near side objective to here. Next slide. The next phase is the assault across, which is what the difference in terminology I said before. It's not an assault river crossing. It's an assault across the river. It's nuanced, I know, but that's the way it is. So you'll see all of this has to happen underneath. Next slide. At the macro level, that. All right, so when you're doing your task graphics and you're putting the big plan on the map at the staff level, this has got to all happen underneath it. It can't just be arrows and everything else. It can be, but you need to make sure that the terrain underneath it supports, go back one slide, that. Okay. And the engineer assets can help you do that, but you just need to be aware that there's all this underneath the nice arrows that we draw everywhere. Go forward too. Okay, so once you get to the far side and secure, the units might go into an FUP, and then they'll push further east in this case, and secure the intermediate objectives. Next slide. Right across to the bridgeheads, which I've covered before. And I've already spoken about passenger lines, so I'm not going to go through that again. Next one. Next one. Okay, so this is direct out of the pub, and again, like I said, I've said it 3 times or something now, it's outdated. Everything in the red box is probably, when it's rewritten, it'll go up into the divisional level. Okay, unless division gives the brigade the assets to do it. That's how it currently sits in there, so that's certainly not what we're going to be playing or rehearsing in Talisman Sabres and Warfighter as far as I'm tracking. So I just wanted to highlight that. The note there, the note number 1 is, it's down the bottom, I haven't included it. It says, in the US context, that's a division's job, okay? Which is effectively what we're doing now anyway. Next slide. Oh, sorry, can you go back one? I've already covered it, but the one on the bottom right about passing control of the sites to follow-on forces is a massive planning problem we've got. And you talk about unit establishments and structures, well, this is where the rubber hits the road. Because if you build a barrack structure for our organisations and you have 2 sections in a troop, you've got a troop, an engineer troop that's is built the bridge, has crossed the site. You've got forces that you want to put engineers, attach them to keep going. You need something to continue to look after this site. So if you leave a section there, under the current construct, you've got a section coming forward with you. Some things that we don't, I think sometimes we could do better when we're doing our establishments and think about it with likely tasks like this and how we're going to actually execute them. Next slide. All right, just wanted to provide this as a discussion point. What Div does and hire and what the brigade responsibilities are for this type of operation. So division, as an example, cuts the boundaries, cuts the task, cuts the crossing area, likely crossing area. Okay, it's not their job to go down and find the crossing site, in my opinion. It's their job to give us the crossing area and we'll go and find it. Provide us the control measures and understand their role in SOSRA. I said that before, they set the conditions, their part in the suppression obscuration, it could be completely different perhaps to what the brigade achieves. And from the brigade, once we're cut the potential area, if it's all viable, and we go, yep, we find the crossing sites based on what we need to cross, and based on how fast we want to cross it, and then we back brief that up to Div. We still employ layered effects as well with our suppression obscuration. It's not just one person's or one organisation's responsibility. But that's something we can build on, just put it up there for some thoughts and discussion. Next slide. Okay, the last section, we're going into command and control. Yep. Okay. So the crossing area commander, doctrinally at a brigade level, is the DCOM. There is precedence though, and on the there is precedence though that the crossing area engineer, and you can decide at the staff level or the command level, there is a viable option to have the crossing area engineer the same person, crossing area commander. Reason being is you saw the engineer tables that are built, you saw all that flow goes through. Even if it's from leaving the staging area all the way through, it's the engineer's responsibility, because if there's other than enemy interdiction, it's all just following the process and redirecting to other sites if needed, right? Following the plan. An option could be, in this case, you get past the far side objectives to phase line yellow, and then you cut. That's where the crossing area commander or the crossing area engineer is no longer responsible for it. All right? There are some double ups in responsibility between the crossing area commander and the crossing area engineer, which is usually the CO in the brigade. I've already covered what the engineer majors, crossing force commander, and the crossing site commander, which is the lieutenants, engineer lieutenants that run the crossing sites. Yep. That's just as depicted on the MUD model. That's a doctrinal laydown of where they may be. Next slide. Okay. Is there another one after that? Is there another slide after that? All right. So we've been through the MUD model a number of times. I'm not going to run a summary through to talk about all of the objectives and that sort of stuff again. That's river crossing. Pretty simple. I told you it was going to be a lot of info, so I'm trying to develop this and go, how deep, how not, because if you go too high, you're just not going to get a bit of an understanding of how much effort across the board is required to actually plan and execute this. So what we've, bit of a plug, to make life a little bit easier, I said at the beginning, well, these are the type of products we've developed to send out. And I said it's not just river crossing, there's breaching and a few other things that we've thought that will help people. We get all the doctrine, we take the key bits out of it, we put it on here, and then it starts a conversation or triggers you to remember what some of the overarching planning considerations are for these activities.
Good afternoon, sir. Major Slater from Headquarters 1st Division. You mentioned reserves. My question is, in the context of a deliberate brigade level crossing, what would you envisage the size and the capability grouping for a reserve being, and what would be their most likely tasks?
Yeah, the reserve can be formed in this scenario. I've used 2 battle groups, so the brigade's got 3, I think. So the 3rd battle group could be the commander's reserve, for example. We haven't committed everything to this crossing area. I haven't got any likely tasks from an engineer perspective. We've got it covered in there. It's some of the things that they might need to supplement. Actually, it's probably a good prompt. So we talk all the time about, the MPs will do the traffic control. You can see here, if you're running 3 routes, there's a lot of MPs needed. So it's one of those throwaways that when the rubber hits the road, how many MPs have we got? You've also got MPs on the other side of the river. So some of our own people from the brigade or wherever else might need to help with that traffic control and flow. Right? It's not just the MPs, and you might then go, for the MP planners, where are they best positioned to provide the best effect from a military police perspective? Where's it going to become the biggest mess or something? I don't know. But that's something that we'll think about as well, because as soon as you lay it out, all these control points, depending on the road network inside here, you're going to need a fair few extra people to support it. So that would be one of the tasks that I'd see them needing to be used for.
Good afternoon, sir. Major Clarkson from 214. My question's with regards to reconnaissance and specifically the engineer reconnaissance piece. Yep. Noting that potentially we would be supporting that in terms of integral lift, how much time do your engineers need on target to gather the data that you put forward there for the river crossing?
Yep, so we need some basic things. We need the width of the river. We need some of the bank information and the approach information. So you saw that detailed reconnaissance report there. Ideally, the engineer reconnaissance would be sort of 2 teams of 3 to 4 people, depending on what can fit in the vehicles. Ideally, a sergeant or corporal, sub 4 qualified in RAE, to have that background to provide this. But unfortunately, like a lot of other people, we don't have as many sergeants as what we'd like, and the sub 4 qualified corporals that we have are rightly so in combat engineer troops doing their job. So that's where we've come up with the concept of we're sort of internally training the soldiers to what we think they need to give us, and that's as basic as it needs to be. They need to measure the the width of the gap, some of the approaches, and then we've got it's only a small list of things we need for them to bring back, and we can look at what the bridge design potential of it is. It's not going to give us all the info. We don't expect to be hours on the site. You probably need, I don't know, 30 minutes or something to get out and have a look, depending. But you know, if you don't invest time here, you get yourself in a lot of trouble if you don't do it properly, right? So people might balk at needing some time to get out and actually have a look at a river crossing, but I'd argue if you don't give it the focus it needs, and we send a heap of people down here, and for some reason we get ourselves into a bit of a, you know, undesirable state, that's way worse than taking that extra time initially.
So when you're talking about counter mobility obstacles to deny a river crossing, what sort of mechanisms would you be using?
To deny a river. So you could use mines, if we actually had some in the ADF. You could use anti-tank mines. Well, we will get them eventually, I suppose. It shouldn't be that. I'd look at a map and I'd go, where are the roads currently? Because people look maybe path of least resistance, right? It's already got routes up to it. There's some good examples, you know, any training, any range, a road going up there, it's easy. It's already, so I deny all of that. Likely crossing points. So as an enemy engineer, I'd be doing exactly what our recon would be doing. I'd be having a look at the likely banks. I'd understand what their bridging capabilities are, hopefully through feeds from intelligence. If they had any tactical bridging, I'd want to know what the distance that can bridge. Because if that bridge, you know, from a tank or whatever can cover a 22 metre gap, I'll make the gaps, I'll enhance the river to 28 metres, 25 metres, right? So that's why you need to know you can do some pretty simple things to mess with the other person if you know understand their capabilities, right? Which makes them have to go to a different bridging option, or you can shape them into a position you want them to go. So there's some of the things that we do, but yeah, in service, anti-tank mines, depending on what you're going against, if it's armoured vehicles, you could think about some sort of wire, because wire does mess with armoured vehicles, tracked vehicles especially, really quite badly. There's a few things we could do there to shape the enemy, but the bottom line, understand the enemy engineer capability, and that postures you the best to unhinge their manoeuvre, in my opinion, from an engineer perspective.
So, Captain Collier, CTC, just noting the size of the signature on the ground, how hard is it to achieve deception to get the enemy to think you're going on another direction, just noting that you're going to have two battle groups in this area?
So that's a very good point that hopefully I'll be in a better position to answer at the end of Talisman Sabre. All I'll say is building these bridges is loud. It's just, you know, it's metal, connecting to metal. I think the tactical bridging would be a different story. I'm not, you know, maybe they're a bit loud as well. Yeah, I think you need to do something to try and mask that. And one of the challenges I pose to the soldiers in 2CR is can you build this bridge quieter? You know, because mentioned at the beginning, people are getting fatigued. You know, the handles that they lift the panels with, they're metal too, and then they might throw them down. It clangs on some other bit of metal. Just getting rid of that unnecessary noise. But at the moment, other than separation by distance or being able to build the bridge, but I think if you're rafting or putting the IRB in, it's a bit easier. You'll have some sort of boats aren't that loud anymore, and once the bridge is launched, you know, you can sort of put them together. There's still a bit of clanging and all that sort of stuff, but certainly not as much as panel on panel for the medium girder bridges. So it just depends on what you're saying. So the only way we can really achieve it is probably to push forces further away on the far side of the river to try and reduce the chance of any noise that we're making here, because we control this area, or you make a heap of noise to the north or the south in this case to try and distract them, or fire artillery or something, or smoke. Make out like you're going to build somewhere else. You only need to divert their attention for up to 12 hours and we're crossing, you know, if you're going to put medium girder bridges in. So I think we can get a bit creative with that and just create that type of dilemma for them. what I'd be aiming to try and do.
I'd probably add to that, not to get fixated on the brigade, because this is a tactical action that's occurring at the formation level in support of the Div and the Corps. So that deception might be happening at the divisional or corps level to enable this to occur itself.
G'day, so Captain Nick Lyons, AKC. Just a question regarding the trigger for transitioning from rafting to bridging and what that means for the bridgehead force and what are the risks associated with that?
Yeah, so if we're going to put an IRB in the bridge configuration here, let's just assume that the tides and the river and the banks and all that sort of stuff facilitate it. You could run both, right? So I'd probably run both, because as soon as that bridge has to turn, if it is tidal, like Shoalwater Creek, you have to turn it in 6 hours. You can't cross it, right? Which is, unfortunately, it would have been good to do that this year, because I think it challenges the planners. It challenges the engineers on the ground, because you're not just, like I said, an exercise for them to cross this packet. They only need to have the bridge set for 30 minutes and that packet goes across. But when you're crossing lots and lots of people, they need to manage the tide. So pause, take an interior panel out, connect, go again as the rivers. Otherwise, your viability of that crossing site isn't good. So I think if you have that bridge site and then about no closer than 300 metres, I think it is, from that you've got a raft site. It gives you concurrency. So you could have, it gives you options. Sorry, so you could have route bronze, comes down here, and it could, site 1 could be raft, site 2 could be the bridge. When the bridge is not tidal, when the bridge is not feasible, it's been turned, you move them to the rafting. Otherwise, you've got a whole sort of formation group that just does nothing for 6 hours or during that tidal window. You need a plan B, and others will go, well, why don't you build the fixed bridges? But if the river's really wide, there's limitations on how big these fixed bridges can be. So that's how I'd approach it. I'd have that option to go full bridge on the IRB, on the floating bridge, and then rafting when that bridge is not viable.
So the bridging table appears to be triggered all on timings. This looks like it's at high risk of people not being able to move when required. Is there a fallback needs to be planned into doing it all on call, effectively like a fire plan going back to on call? And then what's the mechanisms we need to plan for to have all that movement? And I'm assuming comms is a big risk as well. If that falls over, what's the manual way we should do it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We build holding areas and things like that in there, and maybe when they get to the C4I, they'll talk more about comms options, but we've got the radio setups. The plan will be set and everyone will know it. So combat team, whatever, from this unit will have, this is your timings, these are the packets, do it in this order. And that's along the way, MPs are checking it off as well. So we've got some sort of form of control during that, but yeah, that's one of the big risks with it, you're right. We lose comms. I don't have an answer for you right now. And if everything just stops, if we have an issue on one of these routes, it just has to pause until we fix the issue. It's the nature of the beast. It's not going to be easy. You'll have one packet go along here. They're meant to go left. They'll go right. It'll happen. And you go, where the hell's that packet gone? If you haven't got, it's the nature of the beast. You just need to react to it and use that flexibility, and I suppose put a traffic control point there maybe. But yeah, I don't have an answer for you, and maybe we can trial some of those things if we go comms black and we're in the middle of this maybe, and see what we can come up with, or identify some stuff during planning.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to commence with now is what we consider BOS considerations, SMEs, namely commanding officers from various regiments, to talk supporting concepts. Right, this is vitally important for those planners, both at brigade and above, so you understand the resource, time and communication requirements to be able to co-ord all of this. See your guns.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Khalid El-Khaligi, CO 1st Regiment RAA. What you've got on the screen behind me, it's probably hard to read. It's just some basic considerations for employment of artillery,
in gap crossings in the frame of SOSRA. I'm actually not going to be using this much. It's just for you to have a look at it in the background. I'm going to be focusing on the mud model, having a look at the problem we've got laid out here, and describing how we would support this particular operation. First of all, I want to say straight up, with the 2 gun batteries we have, and they're represented here by 2 M777 icons, that is not enough to get the job done fire support-wise for this operation, okay? We would need significant augmentation and significant support from Div fires and above to actually conduct this. And I'm going to describe how Div fires would support us in this particular operation. The way I'm going to talk about this is going through in sort of 3 distinct parts or phases. First of all, the movement to and securing of the near bank by the support force, focusing on the suppression. Then the crossing and securing of the far bank objective, focused on the obscuration, securing and reduction. And then the breakout by the bridgehead force to secure the intermediate and the far objective, focusing on the assault. I'll talk about the essential fire support tasks that would likely be in play for each of those 3 parts. The other thing I want to lead off as well is we would not own all of this battle space that you see here on the mud model. As we approach this particular obstacle, we would have core conducting shaping operations to the east, destroying high-value targets, large counter-attack forces. We would also have division with its coordinated fire line, probably somewhere along here where the intermediate objective is, owning this battle space, because it's their job to conduct counter-battery fires and to shape the deep to reduce the amount of combat power for the combat brigades that are conducting the close fight. So by the time we get to this, it's highly likely that a lot of these enemy objectives are going to be reduced in combat power, and they must be reduced in combat power. We can't actually effectively conduct the obstacle crossing. Okay, looking at the first part now, which is the support force moving through and securing the near bank. Our essential fire support task with this would likely be task, destroy high-value targets that have an ability to disrupt the near bank. Purpose is to support the support force securing the near bank. The method would likely see priority fire support to the supporting battle group conducting this near bank security. Div assets conducting the fires on the enemy artillery and HVTs in the deep space. And then our close fires being brigaded, so both gun lines being directly, both gun lines being employed in general support to the brigade headquarters to apply maximum concentration of fire onto enemy locations that are affecting the actual security of that near bank. Okay, with the effect being that key HVTs are destroyed and the near bank is secured by the support force. As mentioned, as we move through into this location, you'll start to see division and brigade start moving their coordinated fire lines further to the east in this location, so we start to take up more battle space. But the way I'd see it is brigade would own from the river to this near objective, division would own the intermediate and beyond, and then as we secured the near bank, we would switch that slightly so that the battle group JFEC reporting that battle group here can start controlling the fires on the far side, and then the brigade is worried about the intermediate objective. Looking now at the second part, so the actual crossing force conducting the reduction, crossing and securing of the far side. And this will cover the obscuration, securing and reduction part of SOSRA. This would see the task being suppress enemy objectives that can interfere with the crossing site and obscure the crossing site. Purpose, in order to allow the crossing force to reduce the crossing sites and secure the far bank. The method would see a certain allocation of smoke and high explosive really focusing now on the fires that we own. We'll be constrained by ammunition to a certain amount of minutes of suppression on these objectives and a certain amount of minutes of obscuration. This is quite a limiting factor on how long we can actually conduct this assault through. So we may need to be resupplied during the conduct of this operation to actually get enough time for the conduct of the reduction, depending on how delayed we are at that crossing point. So logistically, I would see a resupply in between the support force securing the near bank and the crossing force coming in, and then another resupply in stride in this phase to be able to have the amount of ammunition required to conduct this task. Okay, the end state being the crossing point is secure, far side objectives are secure based on a certain amount of minutes of obscuration and suppression. The reason why this is important is we can destroy high value targets in the first phase, but in the second phase, the only way to guarantee that this crossing point is not interfered with is to actually have constant suppression. Lasting neutralisation, which can be achieved with a high rate of fire, is likely not good enough, and that's why that ammunition factor is so critical. Okay, once the near crest and the far side objective is secure, okay, the other battle group has moved into their respective holding areas and is getting ready to move through and assault the intermediate and the bridgehead objective. Our task here would be to neutralise HVTs in the intermediate and the bridgehead objective, okay, in order to reduce the enemy's ability to interfere with the bridgehead force securing both objectives. Okay, the method here would see likely the guns be, depending on the distance, the guns would be right up near the crossing point itself, or potentially just on the far side of the crossing point, noting that we have an element that is securing it at this point in time. And noting that we have secured this far side now, this is where I also see attack aviation could potentially come around into battle positions and support the securing of objectives, noting that they have relative cover on the ground that's been secured to their immediate west. Okay, the end state being that the HVTs that are required to achieve the break-in are destroyed, lasting neutralisation has occurred, and these intermediate and bridgehead objective is secure. Okay, as mentioned, that's sort of the broad scope of how I would attack this problem here in supporting with joint fires, noting that as a brigade, we don't want to own too much battle space straight away, as I mentioned. Div is there to shape the deep, resource the close, and secure the rear. So I'd be asking for a lot of deep shaping from Div, and I'm looking at the Div members in the audience, as well as providing the resources that we need as far as help with ammunition or potentially allocation of additional fire units from other brigades to achieve these far side and intermediate objectives. Now that's all I have as far as the joint fires piece supporting the gap crossing theory lesson. Has anyone got any questions?
So I'm going to go through the C4 considerations for a gap crossing, which can also be applied to any form of more complex sort of manoeuvre. So if you go to the next slide, my aim is not to be technical. I'm not going to go into trunking or mesh networks or anything like that. Just broadly tell you about some considerations and some complexities which I think are relatively unique. What I'll do is I'll just verbalise some of the references that I went through because these are quite pertinent. I noticed that the 212, the engineering doctrine that I looked at, only affords 2 paragraphs of communications. And they do a pretty good job at harping in on the actual planning considerations, but really it leaves a lot to be desired. So we lean in on the LW 6-0, which is the signals planning doctrine. And what that really shows is that signals planning is an axiom across all types of manoeuvre. So there's no special signals plan for this. There's no special approach. We do the signals planning process as nested within the MAP, which means we need to go through that process. We need to elicit information exchange requirements, work out exactly what the critical prioritised IARs are, and then we formulate some sort of technical solution. So the signal principles are the same across all the various types of planning, but these are the ones that I thought stood out to me when I was going through a gap crossing. So integration, you already heard from the CEOs prior that you're looking at either joint effects, div effects, etc. So we just need to be cognizant of the fact that because we might be dealing with assets beyond us, we need to understand those IRs, those feedback loops, and understand the technical integration of those particular effects as well. The survivability piece comes with the threat considerations, which a lot of you have already identified. What is the threat on the other side? What CISEW capabilities do they have? Can they detect us? Can they identify us? Can they therefore target us? We need to understand that. And once we understand that, we then break down into what we're doing functional PACE plans. So no longer are we looking at your generic, this is your one-stop shop, your PACE plan, everybody is on the same net. We now are breaking down functional PACE plans per phase so that we can prioritise what's important at the particular point of the battle. So that's like a fires is a function, intelligence is a function, command is a function, and that way we can work out, depending on all the subsequent phases and the manoeuvre, we can work out which people are not important, and we can drop those particular nets down, and we can raise and make more robust and provide the mission assurance needed to be able to treat the most important parts of the manoeuvre plan. Interoperability, or ION requirements apparently, according to this slide. Basically, I'm just talking about coalition is what that word was meant to be. So we are likely in a future battle to be nested within some form of coalition. Five Eyes is really good. There is some doctrine that I had in my references which shows that not just technically are our Five Eyes partner really good from an interoperability piece, especially at the tactical level, but they're also good in relation to their procedures. So a lot of their, the Marine Corps and the US Army doctrine, they use the same graphics that we do, the same nomenclature. So as far as integration is concerned, there's some ease there. Where the complexity arises is where we might be dealing with non-Five Eye partners. So that's something to consider, especially approaching Talisman Sabre, where we're doing things a little more unorthodox. Anticipation of requirements is always something worthy of calling out. We harp on about it from a signal perspective, and I understand you've got other priorities, but those information exchange requirements, those C2 structures, especially in this particular type of manoeuvre. So you're looking at a conventional tactical action over here where you've got particular tempo. This is going to rapidly shift. It shifts the composition of your C2 structures. You noted in the last engineer's brief where they talked about the various forces required to cross. That means the information exchange requirements change. You've now got BOS effects that now have particular needs, MPs, engineers and the like, and so we need to be able to integrate all of those. So we really need to start thinking and planning about these, not while we're in the battle, but in a garrison type environment where we can shoot, we can discuss and we can generate SOPs, and in particular, rehearse these particular effects. So this is the extract from the 212, and like I said, it only gives 2 paragraphs on this particular point, but it does note that C4 is a critical component of any form of manoeuvre as complicated as this. And on top of that, it talks about how we need to approach the principle of simplicity. We need to have similar communications across all nodes for the sake of integration and redundancy. The other thing it does do is also highlight the complications as well, which I'll go into a little bit later. Basically, there's a lot of control measures, and those particular control measures will have information exchange requirements, and those things will need to be treated as well. So we might end up having quite a congested net from a combat team level, from a brigade level and above. So these are the complexities that I really wanted to draw on. So I've already mentioned it already, the change in composition. So we're afforded time to be able to have a tactical action, pause, go through a planning cycle, start to make these particular considerations, do some planning, conduct a rehearsal and then move on, then obviously that will help to treat some of these complexities. But the reality is tempo and speed can mean everything, especially when it comes to just getting across to the other side and then taking the forward objective. We're not afforded that. So we need to be well versed on what those compositions will look like so that we can do some adaptive C4 changes and treat the CIS considerations on the battlefield. Headquarters Forces Command released their mission assurance document last year, and so that highlighted 4 key tenets for essentially C4 planning. So the first one is threat awareness, the second one is prioritized IERs, the other one was informed CISEW, our posture, and then the last one was adaptive CISEW execution. So we need to be able to dynamically change our comm structure to be able to deal with any particular threats that may identify themselves, or a rapid change in composition to move into this sort of manoeuvre. The control measures and the procedural aspects, so you've got your technical, your human, and your procedural complexities. So with all the TCPs, the boundaries, the phase lines, all those particular things, you've got certain challenges when it comes to that. So do we understand our net discipline? Do we understand who should be using the net at what time? With all these particular stakeholders on the ground, I see that you can get quite a congested network if we don't know how to use those networks efficiently. Do we have separate frequencies allocated? Do we know what the code words are? If we're doing this somewhat ad hoc, are we able to get the information down at the soldier level so we can mitigate fratricide and they know what those like challenging procedures are? So I really would advocate for more rehearsals in terms of C4, and I definitely consider some form of digital theatre gateway prior to doing something as complex as this. And the environment itself is a complexity. So I think it's not lost on any of us that the contemporary operating environment is far more complex. You have a prolific enemy ISR EW effect that we need to be aware of. So when we think about our physical, our thermal, our acoustic, and our EMS signatures, we need to consider all of this. So I see a lot of mass here. So from a physical perspective, I'd like to draw your attention to a really good vignette. I'm going to stuff it up. It's from a US TRADOC, lessons learned. I think it was the Savensky Donetsk River crossing. I don't know the region, but it was a failed Russian river crossing attempt done in early 2022. And they identified some of the key tenets was their physical signature, which identified them. They tried to use smoke to obscure that, but then they were heard, so their acoustic signature, which gave the enemy early warning. And then there was also some other ISR elements, such as drones, which I'll touch on a little bit later as well. So the whole signature component as a complementary approach. So if you ask me to go to an emissions control or MCON black and not turn anything on, but your physical signature is this congested, then really, is there any point? It really just depends on what the enemy threat is and what we're trying to achieve. So if you realize that you can't obscure or you can't hide your physical signature, I would argue that we should look more of a loud and proud type of model to ensure we have the C2 required to enable this particular manoeuvre. But that's just a consideration, that's a discussion, something worthy of debate in the future as well. The biggest point is the fact that we can expect that we'll be disrupted, degraded, all those sort of key words that you've heard in other briefings before. And so that means we need to set the conditions in preliminary phases. So I really want to advocate for deception planning and really understand the signature management component. I know from a deception there might be a broader div deception plan which enables this, and that was a really good point raised. But it's just something we need to start considering in the tactical actions prior to coming to this particular point. What patterns of life are we actually setting in terms of our EMS signature? What do we look like as far as those particular bubbles? Can we actually create, do we go in quiet? Do we create multiple dispositions and go loud to create multiple dilemmas as far as targeting cycles is concerned? There are ways that you can exploit EMS in order to nest within a broader deception plan. So this is something to consider moving forward as well. So that's the kind of thing I was just touching on there. So as you're approaching essentially these staging areas, the doctrine and the information that I was looking at sort of indicated that you have a peer threat creates an overmatch in terms of you're approaching them, they're layering their ISR effects. If they've been watching these tactical actions in the preliminary phases leading up to this, they know you're on a trajectory towards a river, so they can start preparing their defensive positions or at least defensive ISR posturing. So they'll be using things like ISR drones or potentially EW effects. There might be pre-positioning of jamming assets that we need to be aware of. And that's why, for us, it's just really understanding what is that threat. So we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be able to layer those EW effects in our plan. So I'm not an EW expert. 7SIG is someone that we would lean into for that kind of SME support. But there's ways that we can mask, we can create dummy positions. There's MCON strategies that we can use across the various phases of the manoeuvre. I want to just touch on MCON just for a quick second. So emissions control. So that's kind of like how loud you go and how soft you go, etc. So one thing I noticed that the doctrine doesn't really touch on is the preliminary actions, or in phase 0, how do you actually set the conditions for when we actually arrive? So it's just a thought bubble I just want to get us pondering on. But across each of the particular phase lines, we might consider a progressive MCON plan. It may not be for this entire thing we're going to be MCON black and there'll be a trigger to change the MCON. We might decide as we approach, we go quiet, and then as we get to the point where we realise the enemy knows where we are, that contact is rung out, whatever it might be, we might then decide to then just go loud and proud and progressively increase our MCON from that particular perspective. So it's something that I really would advocate to look into. There is an amazing US Marine Corps signature management MCON SOP that I really advocate you get your hands on. For nothing else, that it sets a really, really good narrative as to our bias towards the use of certain capabilities, especially VHF and the like, and it talks to how the enemy exploits those particular effects. It's got pretty pictures, it breaks up the rich text. It's actually one of those few documents I actually enjoyed reading, if I should admit that on camera, but it's something that we should all sort of dive into. So really the summary points are, signals planning approach is the same throughout. Keep the S6s and the J6s informed, do the progressive planning along the way, do it earlier rather than later. It's got to be threat responsive. We need to understand what the enemy has in terms of EW, what their CIS is, so potentially we can mitigate that. The client provides the requirements. So I know that there is a really strong pull for signalers to be information managers, to come in and define what those information exchanges are. But we are a technical core. We look for technical solutions. So we look to you to be able to inform us as to who is important, who do you need to speak to and when, in what particular means, in what particular classification, and how sensitive is that information, as in time perishable, etc. And we'll grab that information and we'll create a technical solution for you. But if you trust us to build your C4 architecture without informing the IARs, it may mean in a particular stage of the battle, you're not able to speak to who you need to, because we've trunked you, I promise I wouldn't use the word trunk, we've put you towards a particular means, which then finds itself being degraded. But if we know that you're an important person at a particular point of the battle and you need to speak to in a particular way, we can apply that mission assurance principles to ensure the message gets across. So work together, essentially, is the takeaway from there. We cannot do ad hoc execution. So these sorts of things require a lot of planning, a lot of consideration, and we need integration from an S6 right down to the RSOs, all the way up to the CSRs to Div, to really make sure that these effects are as effective as they can be. Signature management must commence pre-H, which I've already touched on. And the prolific nature of ISR EW means that we really need to conduct our shaping operations far before we even get to this particular stage. So if we can see on our maps that there is something that we'll need to cross in the future, or a major obstacle, that's something we can even start to talk about. How might we start to mask our approach to that obstacle in preliminary phases leading up to it? So hopefully that keeps me under 10 minutes. Thanks very much. And I'll leave questions till later.
Good afternoon, sir, ladies and gentlemen. Lieutenant Colonel Amber Humphreys, Commanding Officer of the 7th Combat Service Support Battalion. Before I commence today to talk about the CSS considerations of a gap crossing, I'd like to highlight that I do not command A1 and A2 ESHAs, so although I will talk about the CSS considerations at every level, I also do not conduct the logistics planning for Brigade Headquarters as part of this, noting that is done in consultation between my team and the DQ, with considerable effort and support from Commander FSG's team, which is critical to understand. With that in mind, I'd like to point out that, and bottom line up front, during any structure, but most importantly during fight tonight, a gap crossing is a critical logistics event which will involve the pre-positioning of stores, bridging stores, and other classes of supply forward, and may require the brigading of transport and recovery assets to enable speed and the maintenance of the momentum to support the tactical commanders' options for subsequent phases of the operation. It is our role as logisticians to be thinking at least 2 phases ahead, again, to provide options to the manoeuvre commander. The considerable risk of a gap crossing is the dislocation of forces, be that manoeuvre forces from support forces, and their particular capabilities and stores in either side of that crossing location. I'll talk through some of the options and considerations during planning to mitigate that today. The CSS considerations will be covered using the 5 Ds, as shown up on the board, and then in brackets, C2, because I think this is important, being a critical logistics event, that we may consider where the DQ or Lima Niner sits at certain phases of these particular activities. So the first D I'll cover is distance. First key consideration is where is the FSG? Where is the brigade support group? Are there CSSTs forward? And where are those A1s and A2s? Most importantly, where are the bridging stores? Bridging stores, the MGB is 16 flat racks per MGB. The DSB is 7 flat racks. That is quite considerable. As I said earlier, may require a brigading of transport assets under Fight Tonight considerations to enable the speed that is required for this crossing to occur. It's not just the distance, noting we have 3 routes selected being gold, silver and bronze. What are the conditions of that route? The conditions at the start state are going to be very different once a few hundred wheeled and tracked vehicles have traversed along it. When I talked about flat racks, some of the considerations are, is it just a platform or a combination load that can actually traverse that route? If the wrong route's taken, is there any turnaround points as part of that? So distance, time and condition are really important as part of that. Where and when do we have to pre-position the bridging stores forward? Because that's going to be really critical to my appreciation as Commander BSG as to when the BSG is moved forward, so stepped up. Really important to synchronise that in time and space, and I'd offer it's the same for all commanders, especially combat team and battle group commanders. Critical point is you must reduce the lines of communication as far as possible before commencing crossing operations. Demand. As I said, MGB, 16 flat racks, DSB, 7 flat racks. That's a considerable demand, and again, a consideration of brigading of transport assets, or if we have insufficient platforms within the brigade, the DQ, in consultation with Commander FSG staff, remembering this is a brigade crossing as part of a divisional and corps action, may request for this phase support from the FSG assets. It's not just the bridging stores themselves. You heard CO Guns talk about Class 5 ARTI requirements. Not just Class 5 ARTI, other types of explosive ordnance, especially for tank, will be quite considerable at this point. We need to consider pre-positioning of dumps forward, and we need to consider when and where, post the crossing force moving to the eastern side of the bank, where those stores are located again to mitigate the risk of dislocation of manoeuvre forces from their support. Recovery. The key in all of this is to maintain the routes open. Otherwise, speed and tempo is at risk. So again, as I said, consideration at the brigade level of brigading recovery assets to keep those lines of communication open to enable the crossing force to move through unimpeded. Destination, the third. As I said, where are the bridging stores now? But most importantly, again, as a logistics commander, where are they needed for subsequent phases of the operation? What other gap crossings do we need to conduct as part of the overall operation, and where do they need to move to? The deconfliction with the BSG step up, as I alluded to earlier, BSG does not have, under Fight Tonight, a one-time lift capacity. So the desync of those two critical logistics events in time and space is really important to enabling that momentum. Part of that recovery plan, do we recover forward, do we recover rear? That's really critical to understanding, and the grade of repair, and also which battle group is going to be the main effort, and supporting effort 1 and 2 will drive that to continue our focus to fixing those capabilities where we have the capacity, or backloading to those that do to fix those assets. The fourth, duration, time appreciation and rates of consumption. As you heard, the speed in which we can do this means we reduce the amount of certain classes of supply that are required. Div consideration, really important, is at what point do we recover the MGB and or DSB to replace with the FMB, so that heavier capabilities that may not be able to use those bridges can move across to the eastern bank. And I'm thinking some of those heavier capabilities that we have resident within the BSG that need to continue to step up over onto the eastern bank, again to enable tempo and maintenance of momentum. Key consideration for commanders at all levels is when you conduct deliberate resupply, I'd offer as close to crossing as absolutely possible, again to extend that duration a call sign can operate before it needs a deliberate resupply. What will be really critical at the brigade level is ensuring that the drip with FSG, which I consider will be considerably reduced in time. So what might have been every 3 days might turn into 2 or 1.5 during this phase of the operation. And the last point on that is deliberate refit to fight. Many call signs involved in this part of the tactical action will not have the endurance nor the combat capability to continue on the next tactical action. So a consideration of a deliberate refit to fight period to enable momentum into subsequent phases is important. The final D is dependency. Considerations of where the A2 is when they cross, whether that's perhaps after one combat team, may be an option to ensure that duration can be achieved. I will always consider as part of this, many log commanders don't like it, but whether we need to augment the A2 as part of this to increase their duration. And I'll always consider where the CSST, if we feel that is tactically required to enable the momentum, where it is in the crossing force and how far forward it needs to go. Consideration, as I said earlier, about stores dump on the eastern side of the bank, how quickly we can push that forward to mitigate that risk of dislocation of our forces. And then if all else fails, consider alternate methods of resupply, largely for Class 3, so POL, and Class 5, EO, if dislocation from manoeuvre and support force is achieved by the enemy. The final point, C2, especially if you are brigading transport and recovery assets, is really critical. Just a question as to who is best placed to do that. And I'd also offer that Commander's TAC has Golf Niner and Echo Niner. This is a considerable logistics event. And so I'd offer, depending on the location of forward and main, noting in the current construct the DQ sits in main, we may need to look at where he, as the Commander's Principal Staff Officer for Logistics, sits as part of this phase. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Kelly Dunn is my name. I'm here today to talk to you through some of the health considerations for an activity such as this. The reality is we don't have a lot of specific considerations for div crossings within health doctrine. So really we would consider this to be a planned mass casualty event. In particular, this is an opposed crossing. So that's how we would treat it. And how do you plan for that? There's no exact template. There's no solution as to where to place your health asset down on this tactical picture. It's really a trade-off between those two things. So proximity and protection. So proximity, clearly, we need to be close enough with the health asset to make a meaningful difference to the patient outcomes that are expected from an activity such as this. So we need to be close enough to do that, but that is obviously in direct competition with protection. So our health forces generally not in vehicles or protected mobility vehicles commensurate with the forces they are supporting. So we're often in soft-skin vehicles, and there's a big trade-off there that needs to be considered. So you want us to be close enough to clearly treat your casualties, but when you're talking about the makeup and the composition of those medical teams, it takes 7 to 10 years to train a GP. That's part of the Role 1 forces, treatment teams, close health platoons, and 10 years plus to grow an individual surgeon. So you want them close enough to be able to treat those casualties, but not so close that they are at risk themselves, in particular, if we're not in vehicles commensurate with the forces they're supporting. So there is no exact answer as to how those forces should be laid down, but it is a trade-off between proximity and protection. Risk. Wanted to just touch on risk. It's been a bit of a battle over years, in particular in the health fraternity. There are some health individuals out there over the years that have sort of thought that they owned the risk, and they said no to a lot of this sort of stuff. It's not our risk to own. The combat commanders own the risk, we inform it. Because, spoiler alert, this activity, whether you're doing a div crossing or you're taking a hill, not medically recommended. We're not going to say that's a really great idea, you should absolutely do that. It's not going to happen. But our job is to understand your operational plan and move towards you, to support your risk. So you need to explain, get a health planner in the room, explain to them the mission type, and if you get a health planner that says no, get a new health planner. The answer is yes, and these are the things that we can do to help mitigate that risk. So please, absolutely listen to them, because a lot of things we can do to help reduce risk, move forward, pre-position things, and a couple of things I'm going to go into. But it should never be an outright no. And that's a problem we've had over the years, talking through risk. Ultimately, it's your call, and we need to go towards supporting you as combat commanders. Got up there the planning metric. Some of you might be familiar with an old one that's been used for years, 10.1.2. And that's probably in a lot of doctrine. We're still trying to unpick that as we rewrite the new one into doctrine. The new one is up there on the screen, 231. I know the COs are tracking this, but it is something that I think is useful bringing up in this audience. Does it need to be used in every single circumstance? No. It is planning guidance and should be used where it is appropriate to fit the tactical situation and the combat. It is based on the physiological needs of a dying patient. It's not always going to be achievable. So what do those things mean? 2 is 2 minutes. It used to be 10 minutes, so you think you're sort of lost out there. But 2 minutes, you've actually bought time. So the first 2 minutes is the immediate hemorrhage control for the patient. So that is on the all-call soldier. So there's no longer a medical person doing that 2 minutes. That's self-aid, buddy aid, etc. You bleed to death in far less than 10 minutes. So the old 10.1.2, sort of irrelevant. It was just a convenient planning metric because we needed to put something down. 231 is based on the physiological needs of the patient. So 2 minutes to stop the bleeding, essentially. And that is on every single individual here, everyone that's first aid trained, provides support in the 2 minutes. 30 minutes is the first time we as medical people get involved. So 30 minutes to either the medic, combat team medic, or whatever you might have, or the role 1 ideally, but you're not always going to have a role 1 within 30 minutes. 1 hour is 1 hour to surgery. Is that going to be achievable in all circumstances? No. But it is aspirational, and you will have less people dead if you can achieve that, in particular with activities like this. Now, roll to echo, which is the deployable hospital, that is often not within 1 hour, in particular if you're doing road move for casualties. So what can you do to mitigate that? We've got a couple of options. First of all, you consider at least trying to move forward your roll 1 or your combat team medics to ensure that that 30 minutes is achieved. That's going to buy you time and push out that 1 hour timing wherever possible. We've also got a capability called the roll 2 forward. It's a new capability. It's a light surgical capability. And that can be deployed forward in support of critical events like this, just in time to prepare to receive casualties. Now, it's not going to be able to be out there permanently. It has all its instruments and things required for surgery pre-packaged, so they're not plumbed in like a normal hospital is, where they need running water to conduct surgeries and a whole bunch of things like that. The roll to echo at the moment takes about 3 days to build. We can't move that forward for you to support an activity like that. That's staying put where it is for now. The roll 2 forward, though, is about a 2 to 3 vehicle packet that can deploy forward with surgeons in it to support an activity like this. You have to balance the protection proximity trade-off there again, but it's going to help you out and it's going to buy time for that 2:31, in particular if you can't meet the 1 hour to the roll to echo. So that's an option you've got up your sleeve to push forward should you need it. And then consider, I guess, what else is going to save lives on the battlefield. Anyone want to hazard a guess? The answer's probably on the slide there. What is the leading cause of preventable death on the battlefield? Yep, bleeding out. Okay, so hemorrhage, it's up there. So 91% of preventable death on the battlefield is from hemorrhage. 8% airway, 1% tension pneumothorax. Hot tip, the issued Army first aid kit covers off on this. So your hemorrhage, that's your quick clot and your tourniquet, airway, nasopharyngeal, and tension pneumothorax, there's a needle decompression in there. All those things are in the first aid kit to deal with the leading causes of preventable death. So we've already done that to help you with the risk to some degree, but there are other things that you can do. So we are trying to lead initiative to get blood forward, because blood is what's going to kill people. And if you're going to help us out by having your all-corps soldiers apply dressings, etc., within 2 minutes, that's going to help out, but it's not going to do enough. So we need blood replacement ideally within 30 minutes. At the moment, that is not a capability we have, but we are trying to lead in getting blood forward for you, because it's going to save lives. So there's some acronyms up there: EDP, Emergency Donor Panel, and WBB, Walking Blood Bank. You've probably heard those terms. The Americans use them a fair bit. Emergency Donor Panel is essentially pre-screened blood types, so we would test you out before you go there. We know that someone's A negative, someone's O positive, and we understand that for an event like this, there's going to be a requirement to potentially use you, because we're going to need your blood at the point of injury, and we have you on a list. And when we find out that casualty blogs has A negative blood and you're pre-screened for A negative, emergency donor panel is stood up and we can get your blood into that person within 30 minutes. Walking blood bank, a little bit different. That's blood that we have pre-banked. Bank is in the name. We know that this activity is going to be requiring blood likely. So 24 hours, 48 hours out, we have banked some blood to prepare for that. These are things that you can ask for and request us to do when you're having not just this activity, but other high-risk activities. These are things that we can do for you. Hands up, everyone in the audience that's either O negative or O positive. Yep, so that's well over 40% of the room, probably about 50%. Your blood types are going to be the universal donor, not just O negative. It was there's a whole bunch of science that goes behind that, but everyone that just put their hand up, you are going to be the people that we are interested in to bank your blood in advance of missions like this, because that is what is going to save lives ultimately. That's probably all I've got for you right now, and I'll answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
As we've already identified, a lot of control. What was also identified by CO2CR is the reality of structures and workforce and what we have, and looking at all the TCPs out here. So an Australian Military Police Company can staff 9 TCPs with an OVP of 72 hours. As you can see, we've got much more than that here. Or they can staff 18 with an OVP of 24 hours. And like we said, that 24 hours, this is probably going to take a lot longer than the 24 hours. Although I would like to think we could just step up those TCPs as we go. There's obviously going to be an enduring requirement for bringing CSS logistics forward and bringing the casualties back. All right. Early augmentation of an LO from the MPs into the regulating headquarters, be that the engineers or most likely the brigade who are controlling the battle space and the routes in here, is important. And once that regulating headquarters comes up with the movement plan, the MPs will enforce that plan. So as you come forward to the TCPs, to the holding and call forward areas, that coordination will be enacted by the military police. In terms of phase, so from a preparatory phase or prior, the MPs will be conducting reconnaissance on the main and alternate routes. They'll also be looking at detour routes, and they'll be conducting reconnaissance of the holding and assembly areas. During the execution, they've established the TCPs. They're also doing marking and enabling a direction of forces. Once we continue past the build-up and the breakout is established, or if any forces are encountered, we now start having to think about CPERS, all right? So prisoners, civilians, etc. So although our priority is getting stuff forward, what is our holding plan for the prisoners that are getting picked up here? Can't necessarily pick up the MPs off the TCPs because they're vital to the command and control of that forward flow of equipment and personnel, right? So something, as we start conducting this plan, how we're going to apportion those MPs, that's what's important, bringing them in. And, as was also mentioned, do the MPs have to do all those tasks, right? So do we have other individuals, all core soldier skills, and do we supplement those MPs with other members from other units? And finally, once the breakout is complete, their main effort will now start looking at the coordination and control of rearward flow of traffic. What I will do now is hand over to Lieutenant Colonel Scott Stewart, and he'll give insight into considerations from the higher echelon, being Div.
Thanks, Craig. I'm actually pretty lucky in giving this because CO Engineers has done a really good job of speaking about some of the Div level effects that you would expect in an operation like this. So Guns and CO CISB have also done the same, touching on what expectation you can expect from the Div. But I'm going to do my best to sort of keep it pretty brief and just give you a sense of what we're thinking about at Div level when we're thinking about this problem set. When we at Div think about this, the key question that I keep coming back to as we've been going through the joint planning groups to exercise these activities has been, have we set the conditions for the brigade to conduct that tactical action? So that's the question we keep coming back to, the question that we keep asking as we're going through it. And the sorts of things that we're talking about is, do we have a good understanding of the enemy threat disposition, their key capabilities, the enemy commander's plan at the level that the brigade is fighting against at 1 up and then at 2 up as well. And so really we spend a lot of time talking about and trying to understand capabilities like the enemy commander's counter-attack force. Whereabouts is that? What sort of capabilities do they have in their counter-attack force? What are the locations for those sorts of organisations? What sort of long-range fires capabilities do they have? Where are they located? What are they likely to use in this sort of battle space here? And really asking ourselves the question, like, what is the key point in time, or what is the sort of decisive event that the enemy commander is trying to achieve? And so for an action like this, it might be fixing brigade elements and use of counter-attack force to achieve attrition on an enemy brigade and sort of achieve destruction or neutralisation of the battle group, really sort of having a massive flow-on effect for not only the brigade but the division's advance. So once we start to understand those ideas, we're then about doing a couple of things. And a couple of the CEOs have already mentioned this idea of the way the Div thinks about this problem set. So that's breaking down the battle space into deep, close and rear. And that's sort of the way that the Div, one of the layers that the Div commander thinks about this problem set through. Shaping the deep, resourcing the close and protecting the rear. The other way that the Div commander sort of thinks about how the Div fights this problem is through the lens of thinking about ISR, fires and sustainment. So they're the three big things that the Div commander thinks about when he thinks about this problem set. So when it comes to conditions being to conducting an activity like this, we're really trying to lock down what are the conditions that we want set before the brigade even comes close to this fight. So that's, in this instance, dealing with the enemy counter-attack force. This is also a problem for the Corps are really keen to help us on. But the problem with, I think, talking about our higher echelons is that Corps is not this all-seeing eye that is able to sort of just like look everywhere all of the time. So one of the things we've been fighting to do at Div level is really refine that down to what effects do we want from Corps. When in time and space do we want them to achieve effects? And then, so when in time do we want them to achieve, and what are the effects that we want them to achieve for us? So we're trying to solve these problems in the deep before the brigade is anywhere near this river crossing action. The other thing in terms of what we're trying to do in the rear is sort of aligns with what CEO Sisby was speaking about in terms of sustainment. And one like really super specific, I suppose, example of that is the idea of bringing forward bridging, but also at the same time needing to bring forward and pre-position artillery ammunition. And so we spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks talking about not having enough trucks to be able to do those things at the Div level to bring forward enough ammunition to do the suppression and obscuration that we've talked about. At the same time, bringing forward the bridging engineering, the engineered bridges to be able to conduct this action. And so that's a level of discussion that's happening at Div about how we're synchronising those things and bringing them forward far enough to be able to actually affect the fight. A couple of other sort of minor points that we're thinking about at this level as we're trying to understand actions in the deep, and that's with the covering force or screen that we have at the Div level, giving them enough time to get out there to gain the information that we're talking about. So we can understand this picture that we're speaking about here, so we can solve those problems before you get here. And the last one is just about force ratios, and the conditions that we talk about at Div level when we're doing this planning is understanding what are the force ratios that we can expect the brigade to deal with? Have we dealt with the capabilities that are outside the brigade's AO? And have we set conditions so that they're ready to conduct this action? So that's sort of where Div's head's at as we're fighting this fight. But like everyone, we're constrained on resources, we're constrained on how deep in the deep we can go, and so we're trying to layer our effects as best we can. That's it. Thanks, team.
G'day, Adam Rivers from CTC. My question would be to Craig or any of the formation commanders in the room, and it relates to protection of the crossing once it's established and what we might need to allocate for that and how much that might constrain subsequent manoeuvre. And then the supplementary to that is the endurance of the crossing. So once we've established it, how long is it realistic that we could consider that this crossing will be open and viable for?
The viability of the crossing period is, as in the example that I gave before, the troop could stay there. 4 crossing sites, the troop could stay there, right? But that has follow-on implications. So the viability, that all they're doing is making sure the bridge doesn't move, it's still anchored correctly and all that sort of thing. I think it's usually, once it's in place, a section-level task. Even the rafting operations rotate that through a normal sort of troop rotation program, so I don't really think that that'd be an issue. The issue is if we want to attach something else to head further east. And sorry, what was the first part of the question?
How do we protect it? So once it's established, like we've all established it, and then once it's established, that's a juicy target for the enemy. So protection of that asset, and really the endurance piece doesn't come about how long till the bridge breaks or whatnot. Like how long, reasonably, if we're planning this, would we expect until it's not just targetable, but target head?
Yep, so the main issue, assuming we've secured all the objectives and then mitigated direct fire, mitigated indirect fire and mitigated counter-attack forces through this doctrinal laydown, it's the air that we're worried about. UAS, jets, and so, with our GBAD sort of capabilities, there's not too much of it around, and you've got 4 crossing sites here, and I think thinking back a little bit, their sort of point defence isn't a wide area, so we'd have to look at how much of that we've got to secure it, but the air's our biggest threat once we've secured the objectives here, and if we can't control the air, then we might be in a bit of trouble. So, yeah.
And I'd just offer a couple of other points further to that, and I guess it was covered initially. Obviously, the importance of intelligence and understanding the enemy that you've got in front of you, having an understanding of their capabilities and their ability to impact. What you've asked, I guess, is very hard to define and put a specific time frame on it. It also is dependent on what is the subsequent actions that you're going to have to undertake, and therefore how long is this required to be, is it required to be established as an MSR, etc. That would then require obviously to look at FMBs and to further establish this and maintain the routes that are there, or is this part of a broader deception plan? And also linked to that, and was sort of discussed at Posier's walk, is core and what conditions need to be set before you would even contemplate undertaking this type of activity across the board. Because if you haven't set some of those conditions, it's going to get pretty messy very quickly. And when you talk about force elements that we have available within forces that are, whether you call it Fight Tonight, whether you call it in the Australian all back collectively, they're going to be reduced pretty quickly if some of those conditions haven't been set before you would even launch into this type of activity. So, yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, I guess, on a point that the Div Commander asked me to reinforce right at the end in the closing.
Major Joel Buntine, this is directed at CO2CR. What are the considerations for rearward movement across the crossing sites, noting that you're going to have transport assets either dropping dumps or having to move casualties back across the river?
Sort of a very good question. So like we have holding areas on the home side, battle group size, combat team size. Holding areas would be established along each crossing, at least each approach to the crossing on this side of the river as well. And you see that, here we are, sorry. So the MPs are located on this side as well, and those holding areas would act as a traffic control mechanism to then sequence the flow back. If you're rafting, it's opportunity loads coming back. If the bridges are in place, then it's just a control mechanism that we'd have to work through when we got to that stage. One point that I won't go into too much detail, but if you progress this a little bit, say you've got a fixed bridge at site 4, a fixed bridge at site 1, that could be your traffic flow. So as your combat forces have got through, and then the logistics, if it's just a logistics, I say just a logistics, if it's 4 logistic elements, the west to east movement could be, for example, across site 1, the west to east movement could be across site 4, which helps to mitigate, allows you that one-way traffic flow across the river, which means that we could collapse 2 of the crossing sites if we could put fixed bridging in.
Thanks firstly to Commander 7 Brigade for the invitation to attend it, and thanks to 2nd 14 and all the COs that have put this together. I think it's a great activity, and I think just hearing Storty speak then highlights why it's such an important activity, because today I think we've seen some discussion around who's doing what and when things are getting done, and I think that we need to be clear on that clarity, right? For instance, I hear signallers talking about deception and how deception's going to play out. Well, my view in this fight is Commander 7 Brigade has no deception
in this fight. Right? He has effectively a single tactical movement and no ability to do anything other than load combat power through a tactical task. So if you're thinking of deception in this fight, you're kicking that to Div, because the Div commander is the only one that can provide a level of deception in the deep flight to allow this activity to occur. I think talking about C2, there was a lot of discussion about how the net sits, how we look at command and control. I think you just got to be clear that we're not changing the C2 of the brigade, right? That the naming or the elements we're talking about are effectively tactical tasks that are given to elements of the brigade that already exist. So there's no amazing restructure, relook, and my view is you're not coming off the line of march to do this. This is a tactical task that would have been planned for as you advance to contact. Because surprisingly, when you looked at the river or you looked at the map to start the advance, it was already there, okay? It didn't happen sort of after you cleared the first phase. Casualties talked about. I think the key part when we talk about casualty ratios and numbers, the most effective thing in stopping casualties is Moose sorting his plan out, okay? So if you don't have effective fires and you don't have an effective plan, you're going to give Kelly a lot of work. And then you've got to understand that when you're in this fight and the clarity of this fight, if you're trying to get across the crossing, the priority is going to be your bridging assets, then it's going to be your ammunition, and moving things rearward is going to take a secondary effect to getting more gun ammunition forward, because ultimately less gun ammunition forward means more casualties in time and space. Logistics, we just come off Brolga Run. I'm not sure logistics pool is a thing. I think it's something that we grew up around to justify a paucity of asset. If we're in this fight, we need a level of logistics push. That's got to happen, otherwise we don't have the time to be trying to work it out. There might be some wastage, but that's the reality. I'm not sure about brigading recovery assets. I don't disagree that recovery assets need to be planned, but I'm not sure they need to be held at brigade level. That to me sounds like a task that's given to one of the battle groups somewhere that's needed most on the activity. But again, thank you for having us. Really great activities.
Commander 7, thank you very much for the invitation for myself and my staff. There's only two things I want to talk about. I think much of this has been covered. What this activity demonstrates is an investment in your skills as technical officers. For a number of years, I've observed many of your junior officer training activities have been very conceptual. The enemy threat hasn't been particularly challenging. Being able to overcome concerns with either waterways or protection or SIGs without that being an actual problem. If war is both an art and a science, this is a science problem. You won't be able to arch your way out of this particular one. So it's very pleasing to hear about all the actual technical considerations, and I suspect for each of the COs and your staff, there's a lot more research to be done about exactly what the procedures are to make this work. From an FSG perspective, as a divisional asset, what I'm listening for the Div Commander to talk about is something that was raised on Pozier's March, and some of you will have been in the audience when that occurred. He spoke about convergence windows. A number of these areas have been touched on before. So there are requirements from a corps and a division level to make this activity possible. You've heard about the need to have some kind of air parity or air superiority, or at least half an idea of what's happening in the air for the time frame it takes to cross this particular river. There's some space domain impacts there. We may or may not be close enough to an ocean for a maritime aspect to be relevant. Perhaps that's where our deception comes from. There are domain considerations that this brigade doesn't control. The FSG certainly doesn't. But we're very interested to hear what the Div Commander has to say about how each of the 5 domains will allow success of this particular activity at a particular point in time. Why do I care? Because whilst the brigade is focused on this river, my FSG is a long way back towards Ingham, back at the A-pod, the S-pod. Half of my brain is looking backwards to see what I need out of the National Support Base for what you do on the other side of the river, and half of my brain is figuring out how to get Moose what he needs from an artillery ammunition perspective, how to help and make sure that Kelly's Hospital is cleared in time for your casualties to come through, and all of the other transport assets that we need on the battle space to make this work. So for me, it's 2 things. Invest in your technical education as officers in your own corps and understand exactly what those procedures are and do the maths. And secondly, start to listen for convergence windows. Those opportunities might be just within the brigade, or for your brigade commander and I, we're listening to the Div's understanding of when we're going to get that window. When you are ready to cross this river, the division may not be ready. The FSG may not be ready. The hospital might be full of your casualties from the last activity. There are a number of preconditions that might mean you have more time to plan this, or alternatively less. So any opportunity to rehearse and learn now is fantastic. Thank you for the invitation.
Just a couple of points, team. Firstly, thank you very much to everyone who was involved in coordinating this activity, and also the investment of time from those who came externally to provide some insights and also some commentary. I just wanted to, a lot covered today. I wanted to focus, I guess, on two aspects. One, was covered by the Div planners, but very much we see I guess as you start to talk troops to task and allocation of forces as we actually undertake this, that plan 2 down, task 1 down approach, there is a lot of force elements, combat power, etc. required to undertake this, fires, and please work closely with us as we further develop the plan to make sure that what we are putting on paper is art of the possible. The second point, really, you have seen there, this is one overlay of control measures. We saw the fires one for those that attended Posier's Walk. There's also the coordination points that are there. This is synchronisation, I guess, at its combined arms, all brought together at one point for an activity. So there is SOPs and drills in this, but there's also rehearsals and a whole bunch of different preparation that needs to be undertaken to get this right. But if you start to put this on an overlay, it gets quite busy in regards to ensuring that control measures are there to make sure that we can have some mitigation against comms not being there, etc., across the board. So having that clear and across early will be important. The Div Commander asked me to really reinforce 3 points or cover 3 points. Firstly, he just wanted to capture, and this was discussed once again at Posier's Walk. What we have talked about today very much covers the principles, the fundamentals, the tenets of undertaking this activity and the control measures that are in place to support it. But what we need to look at, a lot of our doctrine, a lot of it was brought from World War II and other activities when there was different enemy, different capabilities, etc. We need to look at different ways that we may undertake those same principles because they are bound in a whole bunch of lessons from our predecessors that are sound. But how we actually execute and perform that, we need to think a little differently to do that, because massing forces close to a river in a small space or a small part of terrain is only going to lead to a significant amount of casualties. So how we do that and stage it, but have enough combat power to push across the obstacle will be important. So all of those considerations, but the basic principles will remain. How we execute it, we need to think a little differently. The second, very much covered by or captured by Commander 3 Brigade, was that role clarity. There was one slide there with a couple of bullet points to start the conversation, but he wants to make sure that there is very clear role clarity at echelon of who is doing what and who is responsible for what. And that needs a little bit more work as we go through and further develop the plan and further actual rehearse and undertake the activity. The last point is very much linked to, and once again touched by Commander FSG, was this is an opportunity to ensure that the people in the room here undertake an activity that we haven't done a lot of. So it's about preparing our next generation to have an experience and a reference point so that when they're designing training in subsequent years, 10, 12 years down the track, that they've got a reference point of having undertaken a tactical action of this complexity, which we haven't done for a long period of time. So it's an important step as we build that experience and that knowledge in the room with our young junior commanders as they go forward. Really leads into the last point that I'll cover before we have an opportunity to continue the discussions in the mess is this is the first step. It's very easy to do it here, very easy to talk about it. We start to put fatigue, we start to put night and a whole bunch of different complexities on this that will only increase the difficulty of undertaking this sort of tactical action. So don't just park it, don't just stop. A whole bunch of questions weren't answered. Keep teasing those out, pull the thread and have that discussion. And then also on our warfighter, we will be doing a crossing within that to further undertake as a rehearsal for the brigade in getting closer to moving towards undertaking this on Talisman Sabre. But don't just park it because it is too complex of an activity to not consider the conversation, continue the conversation and make sure that all of these considerations and different ways we might do things are teased out by some innovation and clever people that are in the room here and also our junior soldiers who will come up with different ways to do things. I'll stop and hold there with an opportunity, as I said, to push into the mess and continue some of the conversations across the board on some of the points that was covered today. But once again, thank you for the investment of the time. It is important. It's the crawl. We've now got to keep moving forward with walk run to continue to develop those skill sets within the brigade. Thank you.